I have no speech to make. I will try to establish some ground rules when it's time for people to participate, but mostly I'm just here to try to keep things running. If you choose to speak and you are either an elected official or a staff person, if you could just identify that for us so we know where you're coming from, we'd appreciate that. So just a little bit of history, very simple history. This community has spent a long time arguing for the cleanup of the barrel fill, and at a certain point in that process, we locals decided we probably had the best deal we were going to get, and so we agreed to EPA's last offer to us at that point. Sometime fairly soon after that, I think, Jim Saric was assigned the job of basically leading the EPA effort to deal with this site. And we have been somewhat frustrated by how slow it has been to get something started. So we asked him if he would come and sort of fill us in and respond to whatever issues and questions people have. This is not a time to re-argue what should be done out there. We have reached an agreement. Whether we like it or not is not the subject of tonight's discussion. The subject of tonight's discussion is, when are we going to get action occurring on that? So I will try to just be the person who controls the traffic a bit and hopefully give you the opportunity to get information and any questions you have answered. So Jim, are there a few comments you'd like to make at the beginning of this process, and then we'll go from there?
Sure. Can everybody hear me okay, number one? That's important. Thank you all for coming out. I know everyone has a lot of interest in the barrel fill site, and I don't want to first start off assume that everybody knows everything about the barrel fill site. So let me just give you a quick 2-minute background, and then I can kind of update you on where we are and where we're kind of headed. And certainly I'm here to answer any questions that I've got that any of you may have related to the site. I may not have answers to all of them, but I certainly can write them down and try to get answers for you. And I'm sure we're going to have more dialogue in the future. I think that's a big part of it too. I think I've been working on this project for about 1.5 years now, and been trying to move it forward from there. So, I guess in simplest terms, back from 1976 to 1979, that the Tremont City Barrel Fill site, approximately 10 miles or so northwest of here, operated, and they took a lot of drummed waste. And in that landfill during that 3-year period, it's some 51,000 barrels of waste, some liquid, some solid, some mixed, all types of different varieties of waste were placed in this landfill. In 50 individual cells within this landfill, if you will, and they're stacked and categorized pretty well. Much more, I would say, the inventory of the landfill, of what's in there that was taken, is probably much more extensive of that than we see in a lot of other landfills. So that's a positive, I guess, knowing. But, and the fact that there's 51,000 drums of liquid is not a positive. It's not something you usually see. And then among that, too, there's also another, once they, construct this facility and they place the waste in the barrels in the thing, they also added another 300,000 gallons of liquid that's in there as well. And they ended up capping all that in 1979. So that material's been there for 40 years. And certainly we all want to implement some other remedy to get it in a much more protective format than it is right now. I think we can all, we all agree on that. So and there have been a lot of investigations on there, and I can tell you, fortunately, the geology is such in the immediate vicinity of the landfill that it's not contaminating the drinking water aquifer. We don't see that happening. Again, we're all very fortunate, I think, that that's the case. But it doesn't mean we don't have to do anything. So in 2011, as many of you know, EPA came out with a record of decision, which was what's the remedy going to be at this landfill? And essentially the remedy was take out the contents, take the barrels out, all the liquids would go off-site, all the solids would go into a landfill, and the landfill that would be constructed was going to have one lower liner to it and then a cap, and they're going to monitor it, and then have this potential what we call a slurry wall, which kind of like a wall that's down gradient that would prevent the groundwater from flowing away from the site if it was contaminated at some point. So obviously you're fully aware the community and the state of Ohio were not real supportive of that alternative, and there were several years where there was a lot of discussion of what are we going to do, and I wasn't part of all that. But as I read up on the site, I certainly became aware of what was going on from there. So when I, became involved with the site, it was trying to figure out what is an alternative that where we can move on with this project, and to do it. And so we looked at a couple of enhancements to the remedy. One being the idea of rather than having this slurry wall that may not have a lot of value. What may have more value would be, and this was discussed even before I got in, was adding a second lower liner to the bottom of this landfill to make the design consistent with what you would see if waste gets shipped off to a commercial hazardous waste landfill. The way it's going to be, the new landfill will be constructed on site is the same construction method, where you've got two lower liners, you've got a leachate collection system that's there, you have a liner on top, and you're going to monitor it. So it's really the same facility that we're going to build on site where the liquids are going to go to. It's the same construction. They'll go to a site in another location that's built the same way, and that's very important from there. And then the second thing, I know the community wanted more, and so we were trying to look at, well, what are other options that can go there? And so what we did is we tried to figure out, was there a way to maybe get the worst material, the worst solids material waste off-site? Could we figure that out? Could we ship that? If we could maybe take the worst stuff off-site in some way, shape, or form, would that maybe enhance the remedy and make it, to where we could, and get everyone to kind of agree, okay, maybe it isn't the best. No one wants a landfill in their backyard, but is there something else that we could do here? And so we looked through all the records, and again, at this site, they're pretty well documented. But having said that, even though it's documented, they didn't sample every barrel that went in there, and they relied on records of what went in there. So just because, there's a document that says this barrel in cell number 50 at row 3 is, XYZ waste, there's no 100% guarantee that's what it was that's in there. We don't know that. So we relied on the information we had, and we looked at and it wasn't really, we didn't think it was fully possible to say this is the worst of the worst, to really pick that, because there's a lot of uncertainty in all the stuff that went in there. However, we knew that the still bottom wastes, as they're called, which are kind of like residues, or if you have solvents, it's the material that kind of collaborates at the bottom of an area that's collected, and it's the still bottoms, or these wastes that contain these volatile organic carbon materials that potentially, if they were to get in the groundwater, that could be a problem. So we're like, all right, let's remove these 997 drums of those. So we have the records. We know where these 997 drums are located, and we're going to do our best job when we go in there and try to find them. And whether that's a liquid or solid, those 997 drums are going off-site. So that's one other enhancement. So adding the double liner to make it the design consistent with what you'd find at a hazardous waste landfill, and removing those 997 drums were part of this kind of the agreement that everyone heard about and discussed, and I think we all agreed, okay, let's try to move this project forward. And in February at EPA, we documented that in a document called the Explanation of Significant Differences. And I've got a copy of it here. You may have seen it. It's available. It's on the website. And that just documents that. So then where do we go from there? That was my short background. Sorry for that. But,
That's actually the shortest background we've ever heard. So.
All right. It was very condensed, very short, and a lot of you know more than I do about some of the history, and forgive me for not having all the details. I'm not trying to downplay it. I know people have questions. I want to get to that, and so where do we go from here? So once we did finalize the explanations of the differences, and we got, previous to that, we had approvals from a lot of the community members and the county commissioners in the state of Ohio, EPA, all very important stuff to move this forward. So then our legal team, EPA's legal team then, they take all the documents, they write out, put together kind of a draft consent decree, get all this factual information they have to do, and then we sent it in the end of August. It was like right around Labor Day weekend, right around there. We sent that information to the U.S. Department of Justice. So the U.S. Department of Justice then represents the federal government, represents EPA, in this case. And so as of yesterday or today, a Department of Justice attorney hasn't yet been assigned, but it should happen, any day. And so then what's going to happen is then as soon as the Department of Justice attorney gets assigned, which should happen, like I said, this week or next week from that, then they'll review all the, get up to speed, review all the circumstances. And the next approach for them is they will send out letters to various responsible parties, people who have been involved, on the site, put waste in there, and then we will enter into a phase trying to negotiate a consent decree with those parties to hopefully go and do the work. There's no guarantee they're going to sign up to a consent decree, but we believe that we strongly believe that's going to happen because they're fully aware of what's going on at the site with the remedy, with the explanation of significant differences. So, timing-wise, I would say I would think that probably in that, the beginning of next year is when we would probably start those negotiations, when all that would happen, is my best guess. Again, having not spoken to the Department of Justice attorney, I'm just saying that's kind of where I anticipate. And then, we would get into some negotiation period, and it takes about 6 months, I would say, typically to negotiate those consent decrees. Some a little longer, some a little shorter. And then from there, we start working on the design and moving forward. So that's kind of where we are on the path forward, in this process. And, I wish I could give you more information about that, but, that's truly everything as far as process-wise where we are at this point.
So one significant step forward in recent months is that now it is at the Justice Department.
Correct, yes.
Okay. Yeah. Because for a time it was staying in Chicago's legal
right.
office.
Exactly. So it is, and in the end of August, it moved from them to the Justice Department.
Good. Anyone over there want to respond? Audience.
Yeah, so I'm Marilyn Welker with People for Safe Water, and I'm very pleased to see you all here. Thank you. Jim, how much involved are you with those negotiations once that, do people actually sit down at the table, or do documents just kind of fly back and forth across computers?
Good question. No, there are sit-down meetings, so, and I will be involved in the meetings. Sometimes, you have to listen to all the legal jargon and go with that, but there's technical aspects of it. So these consent decrees, and you could see we have, EPA has like a model consent decree that we send out, and, that has different elements of it, but so that has all the legal requirements in there for how to do the remedial design, which is how you would design this project, and then the remedial action, where how you would actually implement it. So it has legal requirements on how they would do it and all this stuff. And then it also has what's called the scope of work, which is pretty generic, but it has all the element in it is all the description of here's everything required by the record of decision and the explanation of significant differences that's got to be in there, and then there's documents that have to be submitted, design documents, et cetera, and that's all in there. So our dialogue will be refining that scope of work, making sure it's consistent with the record decision, consistent with that explanation of significant differences. And yeah, I will be involved. Now there'll be some meetings or calls that I won't be because they want to talk about some legal element of it that I don't understand. Yes, and some of those. But my experience, and I've been involved in negotiating these at other sites throughout the years at EPA, that yeah, I am involved in that.
things have really changed, of course, in the last few years with EPA. And so we want to take, because you will take good care of us if you can. So I want to ask on behalf of all of us, at what point will we as the community be able to have meaningful input? Will we be able to hire technical assistance? I understand we should be able to hire technical assistance, independent technical assistance. Will you ensure that that will be included in the consent decree? Can you ensure that that will be included in the consent decree so that the community can be as involved as we possibly can given the regulations?
Another great question. So the answer is, timing-wise, I would say once the consent decree is like finalized, then at that point, I think that would be the point when everyone can get involved in there, because now you have this document that is, here's what it is, here's what it says, and kind of get involved in making sure, hey, are these documents getting in time? Jim, are you reviewing them? Are you making sure, can we get people involved? Is the state involved? And so that would be the point, I think, the community can certainly be involved at that point. To your other point about tech, yes, go ahead.
When you say once that's happened, that doesn't mean that the responsible parties have necessarily signed off.
Oh no, they would. So I mean, I think that.
So you're saying after they
sign off,
then this process.
Right. Once we get a consent decree put together, we're negotiating because there's enforcement confidentiality that has to go on regarding the discussions between the Department of Justice and the parties and all that. But once that's completed and the agreement is signed, then it would be finalized, and I think yes, I think that would be the time for the community to kind of get involved, and we can walk through what's going to be required, and we could and do that. Now regarding the question on the technical assistance, so there is language in the model consent decree. I saw it. I mean, I wrote that part. I know it's there. You know what I mean? To include that in there. All things get negotiated in there, but I hear everyone loud and clear, here from the community about wanting that opportunity and to, qualify as part of, to get funding for a technical assistance program that would hire, potentially another consultant to be able to watch, read the documents, help everyone in the community understand better what's happening from that. And beyond that, I can tell you that I certainly have done this at other projects I've worked on. If there's some type of topic you want to talk about, or have a separate meeting to talk about that, or to go over something, maybe it's groundwater monitoring. We want to know more about how you guys do this groundwater monitoring, although you could ask more. But I would certainly be willing to kind of, either bring in myself, or if it's some other expert on risk assessment or something else, but bring someone in to kind of have a work group discussion, if you will, about how that works and help answer some of those questions. But that we could still do that totally independent of having some type of technical assistance plan. But we've done that before, and I don't see why I wouldn't do that in the future.
I could. Mark Allen with People for Safe Water. One of the issues with the RIFS was that the consent order classified the site as being eligible for low oversight. And a lot of the documents that were submitted, including data, there were a number of issues with the RIFS at the time it was approved. Some of those were corrected after the fact. Do you have any idea, to the extent you're able to discuss it? I think the community is very concerned that might happen again. And there's a pretty strong desire to not have it classified for low oversight, given that the responsible parties, at least in the past, haven't demonstrated that they can necessarily do a good job without somebody looking over their shoulder. Given that that language was in the, for low oversight, was in the consent order for the remedial investigation feasibility study, I think we're all hoping that it's not going to appear in the consent decree. To the extent you're able to discuss that, perhaps you could address that.
I can tell you that in the again in the model remedial design and remedial consent, there is no term of low or high oversight. It's just EPA is going to conduct oversight. We can get this. So it's not. And I would say that it is a priority. From the region. I think we've heard the community loud and clear. And I know the community's had multiple meetings, even with our regional administrator and our previous regional administrators that were there, and that we intend on having oversight, whether it be EPA personnel specifically, or we as we do on many other sites, we hire a contractor, and our contractors will do oversight. I fully intend on working with Ohio EPA and keeping them involved, and kind of a model approach that I've used in a lot of other sites, and I still do that is, if the state of Ohio, Ohio EPA has people that live locally, rather than me necessarily always spending money for my contractor to come from some other area to be there, they split the oversight duties. So I think there will be, and I think that there's no question when they, as you can imagine, Mark, technically when they start pulling barrels out and trying to figure out, that's something you want to see how they're going to handle that and do that. So I definitely think we're going to have a high-level oversight at that point. That's going to be kind of the more technically complicated element. Constructing the landfill is relatively straightforward. Things can go wrong, but it's much more relatively straightforward than the hardest element I anticipate is going to be getting the materials out, making sure we're handling them properly and identifying what's there and sampling them and knowing what we'll have oversight. It's not going to be low oversight, and there was no language of low versus high that I saw in the agreement.
So you would anticipate having sufficient funding to
we do
fund a contractor when you need it and so forth?
You bet. So we have from the bankruptcy money that we receive, that we have money in what we call EPA in a special account. So we will reserve a certain amount of that for oversight, and I think that's an important element of it. So.
And just out of curiosity, do you anticipate entering into a site-specific agreement with Ohio EPA for their time? Because I would anticipate that funding for them is as stretched as it is for you.
Yeah, I think we'll cross that bridge when we get to it. I'm sure we'll have those dialogues. I want to keep Ohio EPA involved. Again, I've worked on other sites in Ohio, and that's kind of the one thing that I've been a big proponent of keeping them involved in it. And so I want to make sure that they're there, because I think it's economical for the federal government and the state government to have it work that way. If it does go in a site-specific agreement or not, I don't know, but we'll get there. But I definitely want to keep them involved.
Okay, and Charlie, I don't know. I think you asked at the last meeting about a year ago whether the health district might also participate in oversight. And you indicated at the time, I don't know that you've had the chance, that you'd look into that and see if that was at all possible. I don't know if anything's come of that.
But we haven't, I remember that dialogue we had in that question. And I think that is, that when we get to the point of we have an agreement, we have a health and safety plan set up for the site, and we know what work's going to go on and have some of that oversight. We certainly are going to have legal responsibilities that we conduct, that EPA conducts oversight of the thing. And I don't know if we can say the health department can do it on our behalf. However, I think the health department wants to have potentially representatives out there I think if they have all the proper training, we will work to see how we can figure that out. But I don't see any objection, to having someone come out there to understand or do some oversight of that, as long as they're properly trained and there's no issues with that when we get there. So I'm not ignoring it. It's on the horizon, and I think, and I've got it down, and I'll write it down as on the note. But I think we want to make sure that I don't see why that should be a problem.
I take it your main concern now is getting the lawyers to follow through. You don't have to say a word.
I didn't say that. I did not say that at all.
Anything else from you folks before we go to the audience? Okay, if you want to ask a question or make a comment, the microphone should turn on automatically. If not, just push the buttons at the bottom until a green light comes on. They're supposed to be voice activated. We're not looking for long speeches. We're looking for short questions.
My name is David Estrop. I reside at 1736 Audubon Park Drive, Springfield. I am a member of the City Commission. Given that waste management is one of the responsible parties, in fact, one of the big responsible parties, and given this administration's view that what is good for business is good for the country, I'm very concerned about the role that waste management may or may not play as this whole thing works through the various steps it has to go through. What has been the history of waste management in similar projects, if any? And what would you anticipate their role to be? Second question, would we be well served to be assertively proactive with waste management, or allow the process to unwind without active engagement on our part with waste management?
Your first question, so waste management, I'm sure will be involved, and that, given their role, they'll be one of the companies that will be asked to kind of participate. I think that they do have, do they have experience with a barrel fill site specifically? I don't know. However, they will be like many other companies. They will be looking at other technical experts to come in, or engineering firms that have some experience with this and doing this. And so I feel pretty confident that them or even other responsible parties will be able to have the proper engineers and construction team that can implement this remedy, number one. And we're going to watch over them. We have to review. They can't just go out and do it. They will submit the companies, whoever it may be, if it's waste management or someone else, they will submit a design plan to us that will be, here's how we're going to design it and go through it. And those plans are public, and others will get a chance to look at them, and then we will have our technical experts comment on and make sure they're correct and do that, and then we'll have people conducting oversight to make sure it's implemented properly. So I'm very confident that that's something that can be done, a remedy that can be implemented effectively. Your other question, I think I just missed the other question.
He wants to know if we should put pressure on them in advance.
Right. That was the other one. So the other question regarding that, I would say at this point, I don't know if what putting pressure on them would accomplish, and that they haven't been they haven't received anything from our Department of Justice to participate in anything yet at this point, right? They haven't been requested to sign up to a consent decree yet, or so none of that process hasn't started. Once that process starts, and I think that once we end up signing the consent decree, that's when I think it can be there. But I don't necessarily believe that how they could react to the pressure, any pressure, because they would say we haven't received anything from the U.S. Department of Justice that tells us we have to do any work yet.
We end up in a long debate with them. At that point, it might be worth us attempting to communicate with them, right?
Yes, if things drag on, I would say that you're going to be reaching out to me and the federal government as well as everyone else. So I understand.
Anyone else? Name, address for the record, please.
Hi, I'm Melanie Flaxfield. I'm a Clark County Commissioner. I reside at 1951 New Love Road, South Charleston. And my question is related to the construction process and how things work there and how roads are affected. So it's kind of two parts. First of all, will the roads along the proposed route be surveyed and documented ahead of the process? And then the second part of the question is any deterioration or issues that come up, potholes, where we would have to patch large sections of road, would those things be documented and corrected as part of this process?
So it's, again, we're kind of, we haven't gotten to that point, but I'm going to try to answer some of the, based on, my experience and how we've done other projects where we have landfills or other things, or shipping or materials across it and dealing with that. So kind of a transportation and disposal plan is what we would call it, is an element usually of the design, So in this case, we're going to have, let's say, trucks of, trucking liquid waste, off-site or other materials off-site, trucks coming in, delivering materials. So that will be part of it, where they will look at the roads and look at transport. I think that it will be important to for them to be able to communicate, with the community and the commissioners on how best to do that. What are the best routes? When may be a good time? Regarding thinking about, there are elements of, when is a good time to do, to have trucks in certain routes. When is it a bad time? Trying to be aware of, are there areas that have to be improved? Typically, the companies do not do any of the pothole repair. They rely on the local, county or state to fix the roads and make sure they can handle. Because they may say, we're going to have, I'm making up a number, we're going to have 2,000 trucks that are going to be moving back and forth here over the next 2 years, and each truck weighs a ton or whatever it is, a couple tons, and so we want to make sure they come and say, we want to make sure that the roads can handle it. We're trying to get this, and so we got to work together on doing that. But typically, they don't pay for the road repair. They ask, they'll come they'll come to the local communities and say that this is what we're doing, and we need help trying to implement this. So, but again, we haven't gotten there, so I'm speculating to some degree on how that works.
Address for the record.
My name is Mary Ann Nave. I live at 3520 Rocky Point Road, and I'm a citizen just interested in the whole thing. I'm very interested in knowing, you've mentioned several processes that have to be accomplished, and I was wondering if you have any kind of estimated timetable that you're working on. In other words, when you start working with the various businesses that you have to work with to have them agree to help pay for this, is there a deadline for them? Are you going to let this go on for years and years to have them come up with a decision, or do you have a certain listed time element that they have to do it within 1 year or something like that? I'm just interested in your overall timetable.
Excellent question. So as far as negotiating the agreement, that part, I want to say that typically it's about a 6-month process. Can it be shorter? Yes. Can it go longer? Absolutely. Now there is no, again, what happens is U.S. Department of Justice kind of comes in and they kind of provide that feel or make the decisions on how long this can go before they decide to take some other legal action or move in a different direction. So I'm not trying to skirt the answer to your question. I can tell you that there is no, okay, if it's not done in 9 months, we're going to plan B. I can't say that, because I don't know. And there definitely isn't like a hard hammer date where you have to stop and do something else. Typically, in this process, you get involved, you're having these negotiations, you try to run these guidelines, and the federal agencies, we have these kind of dialogue over where are we going, how is this going, what issues need to get resolved, is this truly going nowhere, do we need to go to a plan B? We may build internal deadlines that we may have to kind of go there, but it's just too early in the process to kind of really be able to give you a true answer because we haven't gotten there yet. But there is no, I can say there is no like deadline that it has to be done by such and such date.
If the responsible parties are not agreeable, it could take a significant amount of legal time, right?
Yes.
So he can't predict what the responsible parties are going to do. He can hope, but he can't predict. Right?
Well, and to add to that, so you're talking about, typically, you said a 6-month timeline for the consent decree. How long does the design process take then once we have a consent decree?
Great. So I would say that, typically the design takes about a year to get done. Okay. Because usually what that will entail is, they're going to go out and they're going to take some samples around the landfill, even though they've got information to kind of figure out. It's not as much what's in the landfill. There will be, what kind of liquids are there, or whatever, but also be, try to sample some of the materials to see. It may be looking at some of the solids. Are we going to have to, are they going to have to add some type of stabilization agent to them? How is it going to hold up in what form? So there'll be some geotechnical engineering, as we call it, studies that typically will go on between it. So that usually takes about a year for that process to happen. And so because part of it is that kind of that pre-design sampling that they'll do, and then they'll send us either like a design, like 30% of the design to get completed first, typically, and they'll send in here do it, and then they may do another one or like a 60% or a 90%. We haven't gotten there, but I would say as a general rule, it's about a year for that design, and then they would implement it after that.
And sorry, Mark Allen again here. In your scope of work that's going to be attached to the consent decree, there are deadlines, so to speak, for submittals that will come in, and generally they're triggered off of within so many days of EPA's approval of this document, you'll submit the next one.
Right.
One of the reasons that there's some concern over the low oversight versus adequate oversight is that one of the games that's played is to submit a very substandard document, and then the work that's done actually becomes dependent on the quality of the review of that document that's done. And often there's a resubmittal of that document based on USEPA's comments, some of which may incorporate the states or wherever you come up with them. And you may get another submittal that isn't acceptable. However, in the consent decree, I would assume, as there are in most, that there are stipulated penalties if you determine that the responsible parties that are submitting these documents aren't acting in good faith, and you've given them every opportunity. You do have the ability to kind of push them along, do you not?
Yeah, I mean, yes. So in those model consent decrees, there's stipulated penalty language and dispute resolution language, meaning if you have, all that's kind of standard. And again, we haven't provided that to them to kind of, discuss those or negotiate them. But certainly that information, that, almost all consent decrees have that language in there.
Right. I guess what I'm getting at, if there's concern about waste management or another company dragging its feet, there are some tools built into the agreement that would assist EPA in pushing them along.
Correct. Yeah, there is. So it's not that if they, I mean, I want to avoid like the scenario you just said. I mean, Mark, you've lived through that through those scenarios. And we've all, as a regulator, I've had that happen. So we try to avoid that, and we do have legal language to kind of keep the process moving, ensure the documents are of high quality, and making sure we're not just getting strung along, in the process. So.
Address for the record.
My name is Laura Koffenbarger. I live in German Township, and I have a question that concerns the present time and up until the time the landfill is effectively cleaned up. And my question is, how do we know that the waste is being contained and is not getting into water off-site, mostly private water, drinking water?
The question is like today. How do we know today?
Yes.
How do we know between now
I mean,
and
what are the guarantees that this 3 million gallons of waste is not going off site, since it's been on the site from 76 to 79? What's the guarantee that we have as citizens?
We've got the question.
Okay.
Thank you. All I can go on, or all I can tell you, is that there's been, several times that we have sampled the groundwater surrounding the landfill over the last 40 years, and we don't see, in all those cases, we haven't seen contamination in, the drinking water aquifers. We're not seeing that. The most recent sampling was done by the state of Ohio, and I think it was 2014, I think was the last time it was done. And again, it was the same results from previous sample events. So between now and when they start, when they actually get in, I don't know if there's going to be any more groundwater sampling. I think we're going to live with the fact that, given the construction technique, how this thing's been constructed, the fact it's been there for 40 years, and the track record shows that we don't have groundwater monitoring and don't have groundwater contamination, we're going to assume that is the case. We're going to get the material out, and then we're going to put in the new cell and potentially have to install new groundwater monitoring wells to ensure that it's not leaking at that point. So that's our path forward. I understand the concern you've got. There's always that lack of time of when you sample. I can't say for sure whether, Waste Management, whatever party, will sample the groundwater again in the interim, or if the state of Ohio will go and sample, Ohio EPA will go and sample that in the interim or not. I'm not sure. But at this point, I think we're going to go with the results that we've had have been very similar over the last 40 years there. And I think, as I said, given the geology surrounding this barrel fill, I think we're very fortunate for this, that it hasn't been leaking.
If I could add just one thing to that, establishing the geology in terms of installing a new monitoring well network will be fairly important. Another issue, and of course we haven't seen it, I think, since 2006 when they did the test pits and looked at the drums during the RI, that what really we're all trying to prevent is the eventual release of all that material, because the drums were more or less intact at that point. Part of the reason for that is that there are sand seams within the till that's there, and the drums were found to be, for the most part, underwater, which really reduced their exposure to oxygen and hence their ability to corrode. To go to a site where this many drums were disposed of 40 years ago and find the drums intact enough to perhaps be able to lift them up without them falling apart is a very fortunate part of this. And I just wanted to throw out that without debating the geology, a big part of the reason that we may not be seeing the kinds of releases that might otherwise be anticipated is that one hopes that the majority of the material, the majority of the drums remain intact, although it has been another 12 years, I think, since we've seen them.
Yeah, no, I would agree.
Address for the record, please.
Kyle Taylor, State Representative for the 79th District, 4674 Hominy Ridge Road, which should be noted it's about a mile south of this dump. And we have 3 active wells on our property. The question I have, though, I came to listen tonight, but Commissioner Wilt asked a great question, and I have to go back to some issues we had with a hog farm that was built, a very large hog farm that was built in South Charleston, where they had 800 truckloads of cement come in, and they destroyed the roads. And I had to talk with folks about who's actually responsible for that, whether it's the person that put in the farm or the county. I know the roads that they will be using are both county and township roads. I know Rod Koffenbarger, township trustee, will tell you they only have a $100,000 budget for roads. I'm concerned because we went from a $56 million project down to a $26 million project, and now we're saying that when these folks come in, the county or the township is responsible for the roads. I would think that would be the responsible parties.
And it may be, I mean, again, I can only, speak for some of the past experience and some other projects I've worked on in that case where when they've done, that in some, in some, they're just relying on the county's roads to be good enough and substantial to do that.
From living in that area, I can tell you they're good enough.
Right.
now.
Right,
But
but after
after
thousands of
2,000 trucks come in,
Yeah.
that's going to be a whole other issue. I guess my question is that part of the negotiation that's going to go on of who's going to pay for the road repair after it's done?
I don't think that's your question. I think it's not a question. You would like to see that included, right?
Thank you, Mayor.
And I agree with you. We'd like you to see
I'll write
if we
that
can
down.
get that included in the negotiation. I assume you would too, county commissioners. Name address for the record.
Hi, my name is Jerry Black. Address is 2825 Wildflower Drive, Springfield. 3 questions. How many responsible parties are we talking about? Second question, are there going to be any contingency plans that when these responsible parties are notified and they decide to file bankruptcy or go belly up, who's going to pick up the slack? And what actually is the worst stuff that's been determined that's now sitting in the landfill at the concentration rate of how much of, say, an ounce or X amount of drops or gallons are going to end up contaminating how much groundwater if this stuff isn't handled properly when it's being taken out?
I don't know if I can give you great answers for any of that, unfortunately, right now. So I don't know the full number of responsible parties that how they're breaking up, and there's different groups. I mean, obviously, waste management is one of the largest one, but there's a group that goes under the acronym RESA, which is made up of several companies, and there are lots of parties that may get noticed. So I can't tell you if it's going to be 5, if it's going to be 10, if it's going to be 20 or more. I don't know that answer. And again, and that will be based on the Justice Department will decide how many parties we're going to interact with and how that's going to work. Your other question regarding what was your second one again? It was the
contingency plans
right, yeah.
when somebody files bankruptcy.
Right. So that's always a concern. So what happens is when we have these consent decrees, when we do get it signed, there's a financial assurance clause. So they'll have to put up financial assurance that would ensure that if they do go bankrupt, that there's money, whether it be in a some type of insurance account. There's like 3 or 4 financial mechanisms that can be developed that they can use. So we will have financial contingencies to kind of prevent that when they sign up. That's all that's kind of a standard language thing from there. And your last question, as far as what's the worst of the worst in there, and my answer is I don't know.
Who knows at this point?
Well, I mean, I think we can only go on, just what we have is the information that is in the remedial investigation report that goes through all the drums and the sampler from all the drums. And all I can tell you is I go back to the design, that regardless of what's the worst stuff that's there, the design of the landfill is such that it's designed to handle that, quote unquote, the worst stuff that might be there. Because it's the same design that we would take if we were to take it all and ship it off to another commercial facility. This landfill that we're going to build is the same design essentially as one that the stuff will be shipped to.
Will it meet the same standards if you shipped it, as opposed to putting it back into the landfill? Will it have to meet the same standards if you were to ship it off-site?
I guess that I'd have to look at all the standards in detail because I don't know all of them. But as far as, yes, how they're going to construct the landfill, my understanding is that the construction technique as far as, what would be required is the same. That will all be the same.
Okay, that's construction techniques. What about the way it's handled, though? Is it processed the same way as if it were going to be transported off-site as opposed to it remaining on-site?
Well, I mean, I think that what they're going to do is the solids are going to stay on site. And so it may be that they have to add a stabilization agent to make the material drier, which would be the same thing they would do at the landfill. But it won't be addressed that it has to be. Is it okay for it then to be transported? That's not. It will be what they'll look at. They know the design of the landfill cell itself, and then it will be what amount of dryness per se that does the material have to have, or how they're going to construct individual cells in there. Which again, we haven't started the design, so I don't know how they're going to approach that.
Is it fair to say that in terms of adding stabilizing agents, with respect to how wet something is, that's only applied to the non-hazardous solid waste? In other words, to take a hazardous waste that would otherwise be classified as a liquid and to treat it on site wouldn't be very compatible with the area of contamination concern. And I think, I'm just guessing here, that what the gentleman was getting at is that if you were to ship this waste off site, it would be required to meet the land disposal restrictions, even though it might be disposed of in a facility that is similarly constructed. There are standards that waste that is put in those commercial off-site facilities that need to be met that will not necessarily be applied during this cleanup. Isn't that correct?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah.
And we're not going to be treating hazardous waste that would otherwise be a liquid in order to make it a solid.
That's correct. We're not. That's not the process.
That would only occur with non-hazardous waste,
Right.
as it does at every kind of solid waste facility that operates.
Address for the record.
Yeah, I'm Rod Kaufenberger. I reside at 5509 Johnson Road. I'm here for German Township. I'm a trustee. One comment I'd like to make is, this has been in the ground for 40 years, and we would extremely ask you to push this along if at all possible. We're all trying to be proactive instead of reactive, because as we've seen in the news, things that's happened, we don't want that to happen here. I do have a question regarding the reuse plan. Given German Township depends solely on property tax to fund its services, how large of an area will be restricted from any meaningful use or development?
I don't really have the answer for that at this point. I mean, I think that, the responsible parties who, the companies that own the property, I mean, I think they may, I think that certainly as we get along in this process, it'd be worthwhile having discussions with them about what type of reuse options are they willing to accept or acknowledge or talk about from there. I mean, in some, I've seen these things range from, in some of these facilities, that they have them where there's no reuse element that goes with them. But I think in others, I've seen, active reuse where it could be, I'm not saying you're going to have this, but I mean, it could be, like I've seen soccer fields on larger landfills and other light recreation things around them. So I'm certainly not an expert in the reuse end, a realm of how that goes, but I think that down the line as they, when they're talking about designing this facility, and I think that I'm sure there will be dialogue between the various commissioners and the responsible parties. Elements can be, reuse and what are the options that are out there. But right now I have no idea.
Do you happen to know has the EPA ever developed a reuse plan for the site?
No.
And if EPA hasn't, is that dependent on the community requesting that one be developed?
Well, typically we can't develop a reuse plan for property that we don't own. This is private property,
right?
Owned by corporations,
right.
And EPA can't require them to have any, a particular reuse of their property.
Right, but these plans generally say, given the type of remedy that's being implemented and what we expect to see when we're done, these types of activities would be something that one could envision occurring there. You mentioned the soccer fields and so forth. I'm aware of quite a few reuse plans that have been developed for landfills that are on private property that were Superfund sites. I just don't know whether EPA would develop such a plan on their own or whether the community needs to request that.
What I've seen in some of those we do it. It's usually the community working with the responsible parties and EPA. We kind of help. We have we've got kind of a redevelopment group that can help kind of broker those kind of discussions that would go on, and that, and like our Superfund group, we don't always write those plans. It'd be something that the PRPs might write, working with, a local community or county or city to kind of figure out. I'm not saying no to it. I just say I don't know right now. I really don't. Because again, we haven't had any dialogue with anybody about actually agreeing to conduct the work yet. And I think that's truly the first step that we have to get to. We have to get a party that agrees to sign up and do the work.
I have one other question. It's been roughly a year ago we all met in Charlie's office there, or not his office, but the meeting room. And unless it was a misunderstanding of mine, it was determined that hopefully within a year and a half there would be a shovel in the ground. Well, this summer is going to be that half mark. Are we still on track for that?
I would say that no, we're not on track for that. And I think that, as I said, if, given where we are, as the Department of Justice has it, if we start negotiating by the beginning of the year, and it takes the new calendar year, and it takes 6 months to reach an agreement, we won't be in a situation from there. Because I think even once we reach an agreement, it will take a year-long process to get the design, complete the design before they start getting shovels in the ground. Just to be candid, as far as I understand it, he's been attempting to press his legal people to get it to D.C. So I think we need to not put him on the seat for this, because I think he's been trying to move it as fast as he could. I appreciate that, but I understand
other people in Chicago EPA have taken longer than we had hoped, I think is the answer.
I mean, I realize we're making progress. I'd just like to see it go a little quicker.
Sure. Wouldn't we
Me
all?
too. And I want to keep it moving along. I do. I definitely want to keep it moving.
Name, address, for record.
Larry Ricketts, 1736 North Fountain Boulevard here in Springfield, Ohio. I'm also a member of the People for Safe Water. We've talked about, our concern is obviously for the water itself, and we've talked about the roads. And Jim, I know you can't give me any specifics on this right now, but this question comes up a lot, and it has to do with the monitoring the air quality around the site during construction. Can you just, from your background, I mean, with all the excavation and the dust and everything else that's going to be, just from the sites that you've worked on before, can you just give us an idea of how that, if the air monitoring is going to be a continual type of thing and how that's going to be accomplished?
Yeah, good question. So every construction site, particularly like at these Superfund sites, air monitoring is a requirement. And it's for, there's air monitoring required for local, for health and safety of the workers, that are going on there. And there's air monitoring that's required for obviously the local, other releases coming from the construction site from there. So, what I've seen that happens a lot is you'll have multiple, depending on where they're working, and, this is an 8.5 acre landfill, and they probably won't be working on all 8.5 acres simultaneously, so it'll be a smaller area where they will have multiple, it's not uncommon, and again, we haven't had this plan, but an air monitoring plan will be part of the design that goes in there, but I've seen it where they'll have multiple air monitors, these little mobile little stations that will be, some are directly, they surround the work area, where they have, let's say, a background or an upgrade, what's the ambient air quality, and then they can monitor for what may be downwind or coming in. It may be dust, it's particulate. There's 3 or 4 things they'll monitor. And the state, the state of Ohio has certain requirements over what typically you can have and how much emissions of a certain, not necessarily a chemical, but more dust that you can have from there. And so that gets monitored on a real-time basis. And these monitors can detect in a moment, is there an exceedance? And so they may have to add water to the area to kind of keep dust down. Because typically if you keep dust down, you've got everything else. Now there's other volatile organic chemicals that may be involved in this, and so that's going to be a concern. But there will be air monitoring of the individual construction area that's, and it's usually 24/7 and it's real time.
Is it fair to say, just being involved with several other drum removals, that in general, what are called high vols, sample for particulates and dust, And it's perhaps the easiest thing to control because you can do it with water trucks and so forth. Then for your volatile organic chemicals, but also, for the particulate analysis, those generally have to go to a lab to be analyzed if you're looking for heavy metals or lead or have a concern about that. The perimeter air monitoring for the VOCs generally is done such that long before there's an exceedance of anything, those monitors would go off and notify someone, and there would be established mitigative measures in the design to address that if it happened. Would that be more or less what's anticipated?
Yes, exactly. I'm bringing Mark to more of these meetings, by the way.
You may be sorry you said that.
Yeah, right. Yeah. No, that's okay.
He's working for us, right?
Right. No, it's all good.
Jim, Charlie Patterson from the Clark County Combined Health District, 529 East Home Road. There's been some concern brought up about that some of the records show that there are dioxins in the barrel fill itself, and I'm not sure, does that change anything, and will that be something that is sampled for during the removal process? Can you speak to that issue?
So the presence of dioxin or some high level of, let's say it was lead or something else is not necessarily going to change add concern or change the design. I go back to the given the design of the cell we're constructing is going to be able to handle all those materials. What we're going to sample for and all that, I don't know all the details of that yet. I haven't worked all that out, but I think we're going to try to use all the, information we have to kind of determine what we need to be, what do we know about what in there to be sampled, and I think, we will work with the responsible parties and with the state to figure out what should we really be sampling for here to make sure that we're not, we want to know in the end, we need to know what's going to go off site that's in a liquid that's going to be there and what's going to stay on site to have some idea. But in the end, I believe the design is such that it's going to be able to handle it.
Can you just speak a little bit about how incompatible materials are handled? So, we already understand that the liquid's going to go off site, but we still may have solids or stabilized sludges that stay on site that chemically just
react with another one.
Yeah, you don't want to put them together because it causes an explosion or it causes some vapor to come off.
Right.
How is that handled within this? We understand it as a larger cell, but are there subcells or, I understand all that happens in the design process, but can you just give us some idea of generically how that happens so that in our heads as we proceed with this that the public and my staff as well would understand that?
Well, I think that's where it kind of comes down to sample each of the drums for some basic understanding of how reactive it is, or what's the pH, what's the and try to understand truly what's in it before you go. And then obviously the liquids are going to get decanted, but then the solids to figure out what's there. And I think that they will be sampling every drum with the waste material to kind of understand what's there. And then they will be part of the one of the difficulties here is going to be just what you said. It's going to be trying to group like types of waste materials and have a better understanding of how not to group reactive materials. And so, there will be kind of I think one of the more difficult parts of this will be segregating this, will be the material handling and segregating into different areas. And they have, they're going to need a large enough footprint to be able to segregate the materials into different groups or piles and then decide from there how to handle it. I'm certainly not an expert. I've watched them do it, but, and how they do it, I think that some of the responsible parties, that's one thing. A company like Waste Management does have expertise in how.
Rest of the record.
Evening, Andy Dill, 259 North Broadmoor. When will the USEPA be done allocating the additional 330 years of cost created by the dioxins that are left untreated?
I don't understand your question.
Dioxins that are left are going to extend the life cycle of the facility immensely, 330 years anyway. So who's paying for that other 330 years? Because the remedy, as you've got it presented, is only 30 years long. So how are you expensing out the other 330 years?
Well, I mean, I think that realistically, you know, they're gonna construct the cell, and we're gonna monitor the groundwater and see if anything's leaking, and if you know, part of the long-term monitoring is going to be sampling for various constituents, and you know, to be honest with you, I have no reason to suspect that material should leak in the new form if it's not been leaking in the existing form for 40 years.
It still doesn't speak to the allocation of the cost. If these folks decide to disappear in bankruptcy, whatever, where is the following the money? Where is the money for that other 330 years for the replacement of the pipes, the pumps, the liners that eventually in 330 years are going to wear out at least once? Where is that additional money?
I think that's an issue where if it's, number one, typically we don't pull them out and replace with a new liner. I think that you try to fix what you can. If there are, monitoring wells that need to be replaced, or that those type of things, that's just a maintenance item that's built into the cost of the remedy. If down the line we're gone, that there's other problems down the road, whether it be 100 years from now, I think that's going to be a different situation. I don't have the answer of who's going to deal with this 100 years from now. From that.
So basically, it will not be put into the present value formula that was used to establish the current value. So you're not going to extend the time frame for how many different windows of replacements are going to have to be costed out.
Typically, the operation and maintenance of the landfill and the groundwater monitoring costs are spread out that way. But that doesn't mean that doesn't go towards replacing the liner. That would go towards sampling wells, typical operation and maintenance you might have with the landfill where you've got erosion, and by having upfront loading those costs, it can pay for it in perpetuity.
Well, that would keep the hazardous waste liability insurance in check, simply because waste management has it in-house, and everybody else is going to have to pay for it, for that risk?
I can't answer that question. I don't know.
Will you be back?
Of course I'll be back, yeah.
Okay. Well, that's a good answer.
You've asked two questions, Andy. Please wrap up.
And that is DOE a responsible party?
They may be, but I don't make that call. They may be a responsible party, but I don't know, and for sure. And secondly, the attorneys in the Department of Justice makes a determination on who gets, even though someone may be a responsible party, who gets sent out a letter or notified to be part of any kind of consent decree. I don't know. Again, I don't know if it's. I could only speculate on what companies may or may not be involved in it. And, again, having not even have a Department of Justice attorney assigned, it's difficult to really kind of say who's going to be involved.
I was whispering over here earlier tonight, and I said, well, didn't Region 5 send a list of potentially responsible parties to Department of Justice? And Mark said, well, yes, but then they may find others. So,
right. They may find others. They may find others are not viable. You're right. And it's that's a legal call that I'm not an attorney. So.
With respect to the long-term operation and maintenance, it would be routine and ongoing, I'm assuming, that for any remedy where waste is left in place. EPA will be conducting a review every 5 years, the purpose of which is to determine if the remedy is still functioning as intended, and if not, then corrective measures are suggested to try and address whatever might have occurred, and theoretically those would go on indefinitely.
Right. I mean, we have the 5-year review is it's statutorily required, and and we review every remedy to say that it's operating properly and successfully, and make up recommendations and try to get them corrected for sure. You bet.
Anyone
and the
else?
State's involved with those as well.
Right.
So.
Anyone else?
I think in the remedial investigation report that's out there, it's public, it has all the list of it's the same list that we have, that was there.
The question is, which of them does the Department of Justice want to go after? There may be some that aren't worth going after, right?
Right. And some you send a letter out to them and they say no, they just don't do anything, and then they decide where do we go from there.
May end up suing them. Anyone else? I think we need to thank Jim for coming down. He's willing to come down and let us beat up on him as much as we want to. And we appreciate that. And I think we have a sense that he's been pressing this as hard as he could to keep it moving. And we appreciate that and hope that continues. So, thank you. Thank you. The meeting is adjourned.